Well, welcome to another episode of Conversations with Tom. I am here with Todd Herman.
Tom, it's the Tom and Todd show today.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Welcome, man.
Yeah, great to be here. Finally,
I'm
this is amazing.
super excited to have you. It should be a lot of fun. You've got a very interesting concept. And I wanted, just before we started rolling, you were talking about New York is where you ended up from Canada. I was very surprised by that. And you said that's because it's the epicenter of ambition.
Yeah.
So what was it about ambition, and what do you like about the realities of New York?
That there is this phenomenal pursuit that's always happening there. Like, you don't come to New York to live a quality of life.
That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, you're not there because it's easy, because New York isn't easy. You're there because you're pursuing something. Like, there's so many industries that's the place where you go, whether it's fashion or whether it's media or whether it's finance or, insert the name of like 11 others.
You're really onto something interesting though, that I'm not sure how the world comes down on this, and I think I may have a weird view on this. So you're saying that they don't go there for quality of life. For me, I'm assuming what you mean is like a work-life balance.
Yeah, no, like what I mean is like you're there, like people, you meet so many interesting people that have got big dreams, big pursuits, whether they're going to make it or not. That's not the argument, but you meet people who have chosen to go to a place where, quality of life in that you're not living in a 2,000 square foot apartment that you're paying $1,500 a month for. Okay. Right. I had friends where 5, 6 of them were living inside of a 1-bedroom apartment. Wow. Right. But they were all pursuing the dream of living in New York City, even like that.
Do you think there's something? I've often referred to my own drive as a sickness. Now I say it as a sickness, like Batman has a sickness. Yeah. So to me, even that's kind of cool. Yeah. There's a little bit of sexiness to that.
Well, we're going to jump into that deep with this concept.
That's true. With the whole notion of an alter ego that you create for yourself. Absolutely. So when I think about New York, when I think about ambition, when I think about people going somewhere and giving up what some people may call a quality of life, for me, that is the juice. That is the quality, 100%. Like being all in.
Yeah. So my context of the quality of life that I was just talking about was like the sort of accepted one in suburbia, right? That, you live in a hermetically sealed home with a 2-car garage, and then you get inside of your hermetically sealed vehicle and you drive 35 minutes to an hour to a hermetically sealed office. And like, that's very much what people's existences are. Right. You don't have that in New York. Like, it's a little bit grimy, it's a little bit dirty, and I love the dirt under your fingernails, and that's why for me this is what you're hunting for in your conversations and your stories, is you're like, hey, I love all the gloss, I love all the kind of like, Zenith Rising story and the hero coming out of the journey, but I want to get into the cave part. Like, tell me about the dark part. And that's where I've lived for 22 years, working with ambitious, whether it's athletes, leaders, executives, entertainers, is shepherding them through the really challenging parts of making change happen for themselves.
So that's interesting. I wouldn't have paraphrased what you do as making change happen.
Yeah.
And I think that where people have a really, really hard time with change. So what is that sort of dark night of the soul? What's the cave about? Where do people struggle with change?
Well, if there's a force that we just give a name to, it's resistance, whatever. And resistance can come in so many forms, whether it's just, the cavalier term of fear, but what sits behind it. Sometimes it's the narrative that we've got about ourselves and our story that we've really attached ourselves to, and we've used it as a way to define ourselves. And then we've locked ourselves into a cage of limits, saying that I can't go and do that because no one from my small town has gone and done that kind of thing.
Do people hit you up a lot with there's someone I love them so much, and they tell me they want to change and they ask for advice, but then they don't do anything? I get that a lot, and I've certainly lived that a lot. That's probably one of the most frequent questions I get if I'm doing a Q&A.
Yeah.
It's either my significant other, my parents, my children, whatever. I've introduced them to a growth mindset, but they reject it. They don't go for it, but I know they're unhappy.
Yeah.
Do you, my immediate response to that is, you're not going to be able to change them. Love them where they're at. Yeah. Just sit with them is usually what I say. Just sit with them. Don't try to change them. Just sit with them.
Yeah.
do you have better advice? Because Lord knows I would love to be like, say these 6 words, it will change them forever. That's always what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, the advice is going to fall into the same line. I mean, people need to find the place where they need to change. Like, you can't do it for them.
Oh man, that's very bad news.
Yeah, no, but it's the reality of it all. But the one thing I'll say is that we need to be really careful with the language that we use, the choices of our words, and what have become just common vernacular that we use in our vocabulary are the things that people don't realize are actually trapping them. You know, we as human beings, we've got this phenomenal gift of language. Language is what we use to create our worlds, right? There's a great TED Talk where this researcher who studies language was looking at, okay, so, you know, in some cultures, they don't have the word spend. Okay. So if they don't have the word spend like we do in our, you know, Western, you know, English culture, does that change their financial existence? So German culture, for example, doesn't really have a word for spending, like getting money in and spending it, like thinking. And so what does that change? Well, Germans have a higher rate of savings and financial wherewithal than English-speaking cultures. There are tribes in Africa along the same lines where this tribe right here doesn't have a word for the terms, or doesn't have a word spend, but this tribe over here does. And so this one has a higher level of prosperity because of that.
It's really interesting. So I read one time, and I have no idea if this is true, but it hit me as intuitively true.
Yeah.
That there is a shade of blue that we have lost because there's no word for it in the English language. And when there's no word for it, your mind can't conceive of it.
Yes.
And so it shoves it into another category.
Yeah.
And thusly you become effectively blind. Like, even though you're seeing it, you don't perceive it as being different.
It's a scotoma.
A scotoma.
Scotoma is a blind spot. You can't see it. It's like
Where
when
does that word come from?
Where does it come from?
Yeah.
Scotoma comes from, I don't know exactly if it's coming from the medical side, but the psychology.
Like, is it a hematoma? Like, is it the same toma in this?
No, because that's a hematoma is a physical manifestation. Like, it's a thing that you hold. Scotoma in this sense is in more the psychological, kind of the ethereal.
Right.
You know, and a scotoma, as an example, would be, you know, when you're walking around and you're saying, I can't find my keys anywhere. Okay. But to play this out, imagine that they're in your pocket or they're in your hand, and you're going, I freaking lost my keys. I can't find them anywhere. So what your mind does, because one of your brain's responsibilities is to protect you from looking like an idiot to yourself. So it has to actually, it's because it's teleological, it's goal seeking. So if you're telling yourself something, it needs to help prove it in your physical world. So when you tell yourself that you can't find your keys anywhere, the mind's processes goes, well, actually, your keys are in your hand. But I can't make you look like an idiot to yourself because I got to protect the identity, protect the self. So I'm going to deaden the nerve endings in your hand, plus in your cones and rods, because we don't see with our
Has somebody studied this? This sounds crazy.
100%, yeah. It's in tons of psychological texts.
Yeah. How do they test whether it's deadening the nerves or not?
Great question. Don't have that data for you.
Oh man, I'd be so interested to read those studies. That's so weird. So it definitely ties into the notions of the psychological immune system and how it's going to come to your aid and protect you from feeling stupid. But wow, I've never heard that tied in that way.
Well, and it's kind of, I mean, trying to tie back to like the idea that we've lost this shade of blue. It's just the language that we use with ourselves just causes us to see blind spots in the world. Like, despite the fact that something's right in front of you, like the opportunity is right there. But if you're telling yourself a narrative that it's not there, then you can't see it. You just can't see it. Right. It's like when we've all had that situation where the moment we've sort of fallen off the cliff out of love with, a girlfriend or a boyfriend at the time, and then all we see is their faults, and it's just annoying us, despite the fact that 80% of the time they're doing amazing things for us even, but you can't see it. That's why, to get to your other point that you talked about with regards to the person standing up and saying, hey, like, I really want something more for but they've got a blind spot to it. But it's, don't quit on it, right? Like, if this person is someone that you care about, then don't quit on it. Continue to feed the environment around the person, because environment is one of the most overlooked parts of helping people make change happen. everyone talks about habits and behaviors, and all that stuff is great. And of course it's powerful, but you put someone in a completely different environment, and just the environment itself through the osmosis of it can help shift and change behavior.
Do you have any examples of that? And is this the same idea that you've talked about with context, or is context and environment different?
They're similar but different.
Okay.
So an example is there was a young athlete that I was working with who, it's from the age of 10, Connor, growing up in South Florida, hockey player, really good hockey player, really skilled. And I was talking to his parents about, listen, at some point in time, because if he wants to pursue this, he needs to get out of the environment of Florida. Me being a Canadian, huge hockey country or whatever. And then in the Northeast of the United States and some other pockets like Minnesota and even California's got you need to get him into an environment where he's around the best, because that environment is going to allow him to see the work that needs to get done in order for him to compete at a higher level. So you need to pull yourself sometimes out of an environment and put yourself into another one, and that alone. And so he did. He went to this amazing private school up in the Northeast, great lineage of producing amazing talent in the NBA and hockey as well. And so that's an example.
Here's something that I've heard you talk about, which I think is really interesting. I'm obsessed with this notion. I think the reason that environment, the way that you're explaining it, is so powerful is you're going to become like the people that you want to impress. And if you're around people and they have a value set, and that value set is ambition, it's drive, it's discipline, it's pushing themselves, it's reaching for greatness.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, you want to impress them. They're good at the thing that you want to be good at.
Yeah.
They're cool for whatever reason. Then you begin to adopt seamlessly, without even really thinking about it. You begin to adopt their values as a method to impress them. And then because the values are going to control your behavior, so to affect the behaviors that are going to impress this person, you're naturally going to begin to inhabit their value system.
Yeah.
And the malleability of values is something that I think not a lot of people understand.
Yeah.
What do you talk to people about in terms of values?
Yeah.
How do you train them to change them? Like if dropping them in with people that already have the value system, I'll call sort of the apex move, but what are things that people can do, if they're home alone by themselves, but they want to adopt new values?
Well, to go one higher, the real apex move is to change someone's identity.
Okay.
So values sit just outside of the way that you truly see it. Like an identity is made up of values, but that's why the whole concept of the alter ego is so powerful, because the moment that you've disassociated yourself from the you that you're describing yourself as, and you're now acting through a new self, a new identity, all bets are off, because now you're not shackled to the same behaviors, habits, values even that you had before. Same narrative about the things that happened to you, or the negative beliefs that you've got about your capabilities, because you're acting through something different. So as a place to start, by getting to your question about the values, yeah, absolutely. Shifting someone's just what they appreciate more. Like when you get around people who've got a high financial acumen and you're around them a lot. Like I'm fortunate in New York, some of my best friends are some of the biggest people on Wall Street, and money was never a skill set that I had, like horrible with money. But when I moved to New York, that became a goal of mine, was to master that skill set more. And being around them, just how they talk about things, how they talk about investments are different. I'm like, well, what? But I want to get to why are you seeing it that way? Because I don't see it that way, but I've got a blind spot because I don't have the right questions in my head yet. So how are you appreciating this investment, or how are you appreciating this paycheck that you get with this money now that you've got, and now you're going to go and turn it around and put it somewhere else to invest, as opposed to other people take it and they go and they spend it on something to self-gratify or whatever. But
talk to me about the process of breaking out of your identity. One, I think that most people, they're not aware they have an identity.
Yeah.
And here's one of the things that I think people really struggle with. I think this is true of beliefs. I think it's true of identity. I think it's true of values, is people mistake it for truth. So they're growing up in an environment. People tell them that that's how people should act, that this is what you should do. This is the things that you should value, which of course they never say. They just, they reward, they punish based on what you do, what you don't do. Things like, do you turn the other cheek when somebody threatens you? Or you got punched in the face. Did you go tell the principal? Or no, you got punched in the face. You go punch him back and don't come home until you do. Mm-hmm. So all of those things begin to create the person's perspective, but all of those things, because they start learning them when they're so young, they create this veil of self-evidency. It simply is. It has been a part of their life from the beginning. And so they have a hard time teasing out that, these are all like, this is a form. Enter values here, and you enter your values, enter your beliefs here, enter your identity here, and then that gives you the output of sort of the human and their behaviors and their neurochemical rewards and punishments and all of that. Not realizing, like that's how I think of it. It's like a form that you fill out, or a computer program, maybe just to make this really easy. It's a computer program. You punch in the variables, and then out comes a neurochemical response, which makes you feel some kind of way.
Yeah.
And that some kind of way, you're either going to move away from pain or move towards pleasure. And so once you can get people to see these are variables and you can change them, you can manipulate them how you want, you can insert new things here, then people can really begin to I'll say shift their identity. I'm not sure if you would agree with that or if you think identity is something wholly separate of that. But if somebody wanted to go through the process of changing their identity, how do they go about it? How do you first make them aware, or do you start with making them aware of the identity they have?
Yeah. So I'll get to that, but I want to go back to the language thing that we were talking about, that we use language as a way to create our world.
Yep.
And so a good example is the word you. So we use it all the time. We say like, you're this way. And so if someone keeps on telling you over and over again that you're a certain way, like, wow, Tom, like you're so ambitious, or, Tom, you're such a good detailed person. And depending on whether that feels good or doesn't feel good, you're like, yeah, I am detailed. And you like reaffirm it to yourself. And then that sort of continues to stack on. And to your point about now we're programming and we're reinforcing that program, adding more lines of code to it to make it, come to fruition with our behavior. But there is no you. There is no you. I cannot put Tom Bilyeu underneath a microscope or underneath any sort of nuclear machine and find a you. There is a body that has many, many different expressions of this person, Tom Bilyeu. How you are with me right now in this interview is a different Bilyeu that shows up when you're around Lisa, right? So we have the purpose of me really hammering home that point with people is to get them to realize that you have many identities. There is no one identity. So if you say that because I've worked with, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, and when they put on that uniform, they have a specific credo that's being hammered away every single day of what it means to wear that uniform. And what they have challenges with is when they go home and they take off the uniform, they continue to act that way. And it's very easy, right? You've been flexing the muscle of that habit, that behavior, that mindset over and over and over again. And so what I do with them is like, well, do you have a uniform that you step into when you go home? You should. You should have a dad uniform that you put on. And what does that dad uniform mean to you? So that your kids can get a different version, because I'm telling you that version of you that shows up that's going to be a drill sergeant to them is going to wear them out. And you're going to have some like familial issues going on later on. So there's many, we're shapeshifters. And this is what I'd say the self-help, the personal development, some of the spiritual rituals have done a very poor job of for a long time, is hammering away at people a lot of really poor narratives that just are not true on how human beings are built, and our malleability, our flexibility, the playfulness that we have built into our creative imagination, where we can be and act in any way, and that's not a bad thing. That doesn't make you a schizophrenic. That doesn't make you a multiple personality disorder individual. No, that makes you a human being that's simply tapping into a power that allows you to perform at your best in all the roles that you have, or the ones that are important to you. Because if I have a Navy SEAL that walks up to me and tells me that it's not important for him to be a good dad, that would be a shocker to me. So, okay, well then if you're struggling with the fact that you've got issues at home, because that's typically where we'll go. Police officer, same thing. Some of the highest divorce rates that are out there. Why? Because uniforms mean something to people, right? And I get into it in the book, and that's actually like step 4 of the process for like how you actually start to create identities for yourself that are powerful. And the real power of this comes from the power of the intention. Most people are, to your point earlier, are walking around completely unaware of their own identity, and they're trapped by it because they think, well, no, that's just my story. Like that's how I grew up. It's like, well, good for you. Congratulations on that. That doesn't mean that you have to be that way tomorrow, because we as human beings are not oak trees. We're not trees. An oak tree has to be an oak tree forever. Human beings don't have to be that story that they've been living through forever. We have the ability to shift and change rapidly.
So how do you walk people through that? Is it an exercise about tell me who you are? Like, how do you get them? How do you force them down a path of awareness?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't even need people to tell me who you are. I just need to look at your results, and that tells me what you are. And even the word who you are is a dangerous question to ask people. Because when I ask you who you are, again, that comes from the spiritual traditions again. Like I'm such a nerd on this stuff. Like I want to double tap deep on all these things and get people to really see that sometimes the phrases, the questions, the statements, the words that we use don't help you actually make change happen. So who you are, not that it's a dangerous question, it's a misleading question, because when I say, who are you, Tom, you immediately go to your past and you go, well, I'm this, and it's almost like an about me page. It's your resume, right? And that's not helpful. So instead of...
What do you want them to do? Is
what
it
are
traits?
You? No, it's what are you?
Okay.
What are you made of? Because I want something you can hold into your hand.
I wouldn't know how to answer that though.
Yeah, exactly. Because we don't think about it.
So what's an answer that somebody's given you that you thought, yeah, they get it?
Yeah. So young athlete I was working with, second year in his NHL career, like National Hockey League. And I said, because we kind of got into this conversation about who are you? He's the one who brought it up. And I said, no, like, what are you? And he just thought to himself, and he's like, I'm invincible. Like, oh, where does that come from? Where does where in you does invincibility sit? And he was just, well, when I think about all of the kind of tough stuff that I have done, I always get up. I'm like, great. That's a great building block to work from. You're invincible. What else are you? Because I want to get to like meat and potato stuff. There's so much. And again, people that are watching or listening to this right now, you see this. Like there's so many beautiful little sayings, or there's platitudes that are shared amongst the personal that make you feel good. I'm not a feel good guy. I'll never be the most popular person when it comes to making change happen, because I'm way too in people's faces. Like I want to confront people with the reality of doing tough stuff. Like I want to pour salt on your hangnail, because when I do that, what do you immediately do? You want to wash it off. You take action. Whereas everyone else, they want to get you a Band-Aid and some ointment for it. No. Change happens from pain.
So how do you, somebody comes to you, they're an elite athlete, there's a certain amount of, they consent to having this done, but how do you find the hangnail? How do you start pouring the salt on it? What do you make them do? Is it a therapy session? You putting them on a treadmill?
No, I don't do therapy. I'm a performance guy.
Okay. So
performance is all about moving forward.
They come to you, then what?
Yeah. So they come to me, and we have this diagnostic that I go to, kind of measuring people on 7 different pillars of like mental toughness, concentration ability.
They're answering questions, or?
Well, it's a diagnostic. Yeah. So they're just writing down their answers, or not writing them down, but they're grading themselves on scales of like 1 to 4 on these different areas. And that just shows me on the index, like where we've got the greatest opportunity to make a change happen. So, if they're currently under indexing in their performance and they've rated themselves low in focus, then that would be, a training thing that I'm going to pull out and start working with them on that. The one, which is a bit of a red herring that I put in there, is motivation, because motivation is not something that I work with you on.
I was going to say, why is it a red herring?
Because motivation is a you thing, not a me thing. I'm not here to motivate you. Like an elite performer doesn't look for me to motivate them. That's a you thing, not a me thing. Like, and all these other people who are out there trying to motivate individuals, you know, as someone who's been a practitioner of this, I mean, I've worked with people for 17,064 hours, one-on-one.
Wow.
One-on-one. That's not counting all of the like seminars or workshops or boot camps or speaking, you know, engagements around the globe. That's one-on-one. And so when you're working with someone one-on-one, Tom, and you understand this, like when you're working with someone one-on-one, like there is a completely different level of nuance where people are going to be sharing with you in a completely different way about what they're actually doing or what they're actually thinking about themselves in those moments when they're both succeeding or when they're under indexing and they're failing. And that's really, really important for anyone who's out there trying to change something in their world. If it's an entrepreneur who's, you know, trying to change their marketing, find practitioners, find the ones who are working with people one-on-one, because that stuff matters. Because I'm only, you know, paid by improving someone's performance. If I keep on giving you strategies, Tom, and they're not working for you, we're not going to be working together for a long time. Whereas in a group environment where someone's standing on stage, there's groupthink. That is a natural phenomenon that exists amongst human beings where groupthink happens. Where, you know, if someone's trying to gain the love and adoration of, you know, Tom or Todd or, you know, Tony or whoever, and Tony says that one strategy, or Todd says that one strategy, does that work for you? And someone who just wants to be a pleaser goes, yeah, that worked for me. And then other people start raising their hand. Then the other person who hasn't raised their hand yet, because they've tried it, and they're like, oh, again, we don't want to get kicked out of our tribe. And now all these people are like raising their hands, saying, yeah, that strategy works amazing, despite the fact that it doesn't work.
How much of what you do is pure intuition?
Not very much.
So in
the beginning, quite a bit.
I was going to say, because you've got the diagnostic. I'm having trouble following like exactly what you do. You have a diagnostic, because what I'm trying to do is, somebody at home right now is listening. They want to have the change. They want to have the breakthrough.
Yeah.
What the fuck do they do?
Okay, well, that's different from, like, if we're talking about identity, I'm talking about, that's the process of if I'm onboarding someone into my business, like into my.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I think that'll get into the nitty gritty of like what you're trying to tease out. So they're doing the diagnostic. It's telling you.
Yeah. It's telling me where they need training, like where they haven't spent much time on mastering the mental and the emotional part of their game. Okay. Right. Because we're trying
is this reminiscent of a personality test?
Well, there's elements of that, but you know, I use a whole bunch of different diagnostics because I'm not a believer. Like, there's so many people who are out there who are like, I'm an INFJA or INFJ or whatever it is from Myers-Briggs. And I'm like, boy, again, what a fantastic way to trap and limit yourself. Because people love to say, you know, that's why personality tests and all these quizzes online are so popular. They go viral because they go, I'm a this. People love to discover more about themselves. But what it actually does is it traps many people because they're like, I'm an introvert. And introverts don't, blah, 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 whatever they say. It's like, okay, great. Now you're going to live through that.
And when you hear that, you hear, all right, this person has a label now.
Yep.
That label has created limitations. They're no longer recognizing that they're actually a multitude of, and what's interesting is I don't know what word you would use there. Personalities, traits,
multiple of identities.
So identity. Okay.
Yeah.
So now real fast, define identity. What does it encompass?
Identity encompasses, I talk about it in chapter 3 of the book, the different layers that get stacked on. So, you know, at this core of what we are is just like pure possibility. Like we can move in many directions with the kind of inborn talents of what it means to be a human being. Okay, so there's core possibility. Outside of that creates what I call this kind of core drivers layer. Core drivers are things that you've attached yourself to, and that are attached to you because of your race, your religion, your values, where you're from. Because people don't realize just how much that stuff shapes them. You know, well, I'm black, so that means that this, or I'm white, and that means this, or I'm Asian, or I'm a Catholic, or I'm a Jew, or
have you heard that study where if you take an Asian woman who's about to take a math test, and stereotypically women are worse at math, and stereotypically Asians are better at math.
Yeah.
And if you prime her by saying, "Oh, you're a woman, I wonder how well you're going to do on the test," they'll do worse. But if you take that same person and prime them, "Oh, you're Asian, I wonder how well you do on the test," then they'll do better.
Yeah.
That is so crazy to me.
Yeah.
And when I was diving into some of your research, that was what I was thinking, is like that there's some of you're taking control of the priming essentially.
Yes.
So, all right. So keep going 100%. On that.
So core drivers sit there. And again, even being a part of a larger group, like military man, police officer, this. So we have these labels, and now because they're the things that really can help either block someone's possibility or unleash it in many ways. We see it at the Olympics, where someone who's coming out of nowhere, but now because they're wearing the red, white, and blue on their back, or the red and white from Canada, or the wherever from somewhere else, they just level up because of what it means to now represent their country. Other people, conversely, I can't use it with them because I've worked with well over 100 Olympians. That actually crushes their performance.
Because it's just too much weight?
It's too much. Or they actually don't care. Some people don't care. That's not meaningful to them that they're an American or a Canadian or a Brit or an Aussie, whatever the case is. So that's the core drivers. And then outside of that, I call it the belief layer. So that's where your attitudes, your perceptions, your beliefs about you or the world around you sit. Okay. This is all shaping that identity, and it's shaping it in the different areas of our life, in the roles that we play, that of an entrepreneur, that of a parent, father, husband, wife, lover, brother, sister, mom, like all those we have. And that's why it's important that we sort of peel away the layer, or peel away and show that, no, you've got many identities and we can shape you. No, you get to shape yourself because you're doing it anyway. I'm not explaining anything to anyone that is not grounded in gravity. Like it's real, it's truth. We have many identities. We just don't think about it. But I'm trying to build awareness so that people can see it and they go, oh, because once you build the awareness, all bets are off with people.
Do you have like archetypes of alter egos that you push people towards depending on what they're trying to accomplish?
I love archetype stuff, but that's probably where it's a little bit intuitive, but not necessarily. The natural lean when you talk about this is people talk about, like bringing that kind of like lion to things, or that roar or whatever. But I have one client, she's in the book, where I talk about, that never resonates. She's this real soft-spoken, like super kind person, and her trying to bring out like an inner lion thing wouldn't work. But for her, she's German. She has a deep history in her family of like exploration, being in the outdoors, and she had this really great reverence for a buck, like a male deer. And for her, it was like the way that it stands its ground, despite the fact that a bear is coming off. That's what people don't see the fights between a wild buck and a bear or a cougar, where it fights it off with its antlers. People don't see that. They always see the kill, but sometimes the prey wins. And a big male buck will do that and fight with its antlers, fight it off. But for her, what she needed, because she was a business owner, and she, again, very common thing where she had a sort of a freelance marketing company, and scope creep. It's like, so now she's building a website for someone. They go, you know what, we need some brochures ddone too. Can you add that on? Yeah, I'll do that too. And because she's so nice and kind, all of this, and now she's completely unprofitable, or she's just making, a laughable amount an hour. So the way that she started showing up in her business was through this lens of a buck that stands its ground and honors the fact that she's valuable. Like she is, what she has is valuable, and people need to respect that. A lion wasn't going to do that. So no, archetypes, I don't push people towards certain ones. And at the end of the day, the most common sort of alter ego identity that people adopt is actually grandmas. If there was a category.
Grandmas?
Yeah, grandmas. Because in order for you to
These are elite performers.
These
are cops, and
these are people that are either in the business world. Grandmas aren't popular necessarily in the sports world. That's not where.
So who's becoming the grandma?
And again, you're not becoming the grandma. You're adopting the traits, the qualities, or the abilities that you admire about your grandmother. Okay, I've got a really wealthy man in New York who's a client for a long time, and he was kind of a traditional Wall Street type that just railroaded himself towards success, burned out and churned out a lot of leaders in his business. But now he had a very large private equity business, and his leadership team was burning out quite a bit. And so when I started working with him, his identity needed to change because he was now in a completely different role that what got him to be successful. right? So that hard charging thing, that really helped him, but that's not working now. That's going to break his business. So he needed to step into a new identity. Couldn't figure out a way to do that. So when I was talking about like, well, who do you respect? Like, who do you admire as great leaders of business or just leaders in general? And he was talking about like Jack Welch or Sumner Redstone, and these names were coming out. And so but just talking to him, I could get that he wasn't like emotionally connected to that idea. So then I just asked him about his family, because I knew a bit about it. I mean, I knew his history, and he started talking to me about his grandmother. Her husband died in the Holocaust. She had 4 young boys, brought them over to America. Classic story of, settling in the Lower East Side with nothing, $70 in her pocket, raising these 4 amazing young men, all going on to have tremendous success. My client was the son of one of them, and just talked with great reverence about just how like amazingly nurturing she was, but really strong with an iron rod up her back with like the values of how we operate as a family. And I said, that's who your identity is.
So how did the people then grab that and actually put it to use? Because when you were talking earlier about, you need a uniform, and do you have the uniform of the dad when you walk in? So I'm thinking, what's the uniform of the grandmother? But I'm guessing you're going to say it's not quite how it works.
Yeah. So there's different ways to activate this. So I want to, continuing on with that, it's like getting him to realize, well, what are those qualities that you just appreciate about your grandma? Like, what is it about it? Because what are those qualities? What are those attributes? And what are those traits? And then, a uniform really helps. Something, we call them totems and artifacts, something physical that you can put on that can help you step into that. Because again, we're acting with this intention now, because you're choosing it. And that item represents what you're activating. So for him, there was no thing. There wasn't something that he was going to go put on. But there was another quality that we use is something that you use in your environment. So he had a framed photo of his grandmother. And he wasn't going to be like, acting through this identity throughout his entire day. But it was when he needed to have conversations with his leadership team that he needed to pump the brake on his extraordinarily aggressive personality and start, acting with a completely different intention. So anytime he was about to have a leadership conversation, he had this frame of his grandma sitting on his credenza, or on his desk, sorry. And it was, we like to create triggers. So there was a switch. So he would turn that frame. So now she was facing him.
What's the importance of the triggers? That's really interesting to me.
The importance of it is to create rituals. And
why? Why does that matter?
Because human beings are grounded in rituals, and it's almost like an honoring ceremony. Because what I want you to do is I don't want you to dishonor the memory or the spirit of whatever or whoever it is that you are activating by not truly acting through the qualities of that individual. So the conversation with him is like, now, choose your grandmother very carefully, because you cannot go into a conversation with your leadership team and act the way that you do and dishonor the way that your grandmother would handle that by you acting in this completely, kind of wild and, swear laden way, because she wouldn't do that. So that trigger, again, it's just, it helps to send a signal through your entire electrical system that something different is happening.
So interesting. Are you familiar with Tony Robbins and his whole idea of state change and all of that stuff?
Sure.
Man, that stuff is really interesting to me. And there's something so fascinating about the human ability to change your state. Reading your stuff about alter egos, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. There's something about, for anybody that doesn't quite have their hooks into this yet, do the following exercise. Sit down, close your eyes, and think, smile.
Yeah.
And what's weird is you will feel the change. Yeah. Like you'll feel a neurochemical change just by thinking smile.
Yeah.
Like you're not actually moving the muscles. You're just thinking about the smile.
Yeah.
And my gut instinct is if you sat there long enough thinking smile, you'd actually start to smile. And then to take this to where you started, that ritualistic move, there's something about birthing it through physicality.
Yes.
That, and I'd actually be really curious to understand the research or, you know, the underlying physiological thing. So I have this obsession with physiological hooks. So there's something about tying your mindset to physicality that is incredibly important. Like when you see people trying to do a state change, athletes will do this all the fucking time.
Yeah.
And I've done this. I do this sometimes if I don't want to get in a cold shower and I'm like, fuck, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And I have to like state change it. I'll fucking pound my chest. I don't know what it is, but dude, you do that and boom, it's like I've got the aggression. I have exactly what I need to tackle this. And to just completely, I always think of it in terms of frame of reference, but my gut instinct is if I were to define frame of reference and you were to define alter ego, we would find that they're similar. They may not exactly overlap, but it's a very similar concept.
Well, I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff. You talk a lot about identity with people, right? Like you're dancing around the stuff that I've been working with people on for 22 years. Really, alter ego stuff is what came into my practice in 2003, 2004, because I just started to discover that this was the golden thread that was weaving together all of these elite people that I was now starting to work with, where they were talking about, I've got this persona that I step into, I've got this other kind of identity, I have this character that I use, and I played college football at a high level. I was a nationally ranked badminton player. I played sport at a high level, not pro, but I was a good athlete. And my responses back to those people was always like, oh, that's really cool because I use that as well. It was more like an interesting kind of connection point. And then it was me preparing a U.S. swimmer, a lady for the Athens Games back in 2004, where it's just the way that she said it, where it's just all of a sudden, all of these dominoes of past conversations came together. And I was like, wait a second. There is this consistency amongst the people who are consistently performing at their best. They keep on referencing this idea. There's something there.
Do you know who Sasha Fierce is?
Of course I know who Sasha Fierce is. Yeah, absolutely.
To me is when I heard, so for anybody listening that doesn't know who Sasha Fierce is, that's Beyonce's alter ego on stage. And I thought, whoa, that's so interesting that somebody that successful uses this technique to have the balls, essentially, to go out on stage, to own it, to be fierce.
And she needed it. When you take a look at her story, she's a gospel singing young black girl from Houston, Texas, who people would show up every Sunday. They can't wait to hear Beyonce sing gospel songs. Her dad, recognizing her talent and her love for music, gets her and Solange inside of a dance group. There's 8 of them. And now Beyonce, who's used to dressing very modestly in a church environment, singing gospel hymns and songs, is now asked to sing provocative music, dancing provocatively. She had a real internal combustion over this, right? Now, I want people to track this. Are there some things that you've got some internal combustion over right now that you're resisting against because you have a tough time seeing yourself do it, despite the fact that you want to manifest it? You want to pursue that entrepreneurial career. You want to pursue that acting or that singing, or you want to get out there, okay? So she then created Sasha Fierce, someone else, another identity to go out there that loved going out there and performing, loved the provocative, loved dancing that way. And that's who she would step into and activate when she went out there. Now all of a sudden she could protect for herself that sort of more innocent Beyonce. And what she found, and that's what I share in the quote, in the book, there's this great quote by the Hollywood Golden Era actor Cary Grant, where he said, and again, born in Bristol, England, in a very modest family, single mother, but always wanted to make something of himself. Traveled over to Hollywood and became known as this charismatic, debonair, good-looking guy. But at the end of his career, he had this great quote where he said, I pretended to be somebody I wanted to be, and I finally became that person. Or he became me, but at some point in time, we met. Which I think is one of the most beautiful quotes that a human has uttered. The only thing I would change is not I pretended, but I activated. You chose it. And so if you think about it, there's this you that you've got described in your own mind right now. And I think of it like a circle of a Venn diagram. And you've got this other self that you want to be, or this kind of aspirational idea of what you want to be. And for me, the alter ego was the thing that could help bring them together. And then after a while, you're truly acting, behaving, thinking this way, and you don't need to activate Beyonce or Sasha Fierce somewhere, because Beyonce in 2008, when she came out with her album, famously retired Sasha Fierce. She said, I don't need her anymore. But that was her private, Sasha Fierce was always her private sort of identity. But now she could go out there and own the stage and, didn't need to activate or didn't need to think about Sasha anymore, because that was what she became.
How is this not pretending?
Because pretending is just the word alone has the sort of intention or the thinking of concerning yourself with the thoughts, opinions, and judgments of other people. Screw them. Like, it doesn't.
So it's not necessarily a change in affectation, but it's a change in the way that you think about it.
It's the way that you change the way, because anytime you're trying to do something to deceive or trick other people, that isn't a healthy way to be operating from, because what it ends up doing is it traps you, because that's not the healthy way that you want to build your identity. But even in the book, I talk about the difference in chapter 3. I talk about the difference between that outside in approach, which is you trying to do things for other people, trying to impress other people, worried about what other people are thinking about you. So then you don't do the thing anymore. Concerned with, what if everyone sees this crappy video that I've just done and, they judge me as being, a loser on video or whatever. Or we could all see that it's just the maturation process that you've gone through. Like the Tom Bilyeu in Interviews Today is different than the Tom Bilyeu that came out interview number 1, right? Like I'm guessing, but I know it's true. You're better at asking questions. You dive deeper. You've got a richer set of, just confidence around being patient, kind of saying, you know what, you just said something. Let's go back to that. We were talking about that earlier.
Sure.
Whereas the intention of you saying, this is how I want to show up now. I am not going to stay tethered to this past narrative. I'm not going to stay tethered to these ideas that I have to be this way because someone from Topeka, Kansas has never made it somewhere, or that someone in Topeka, Kansas can't be the most creative artist on the planet. What if you were the first in Topeka, Kansas to be the most creative artist on the planet and people flew into Topeka in order to see you? That would be phenomenal for you to go and do. So it's the changing in the perception of where we're coming from here. But I wanted to come back to something that you had said, is like when you said you were just fascinated with this whole state change thing and that you're like getting into the science. Well, do you want me to share you some science behind it?
Please, definitely.
So a great piece of research. So there's a psychological phenomenon that we've got called enclothed cognition. Enclothed cognition is that we as human beings, we attach meaning and story to the clothing that other people wear or that we wear. So, case in point.
Go on.
Yes. So, if someone were to walk into this room with us right now and they had on a doctor's coat or a lab coat, immediately at an unconscious level, you're going to make a whole bunch of assumptions and tell a story about that person.
No question.
Right? So it could be that they're successful. And again, everyone's different because all of us have had different experiences with people in white coats. But for the most part, if it was a doctor's coat, it's that they're successful or they're smart, they're detailed, and so on. So we do that. What people don't realize is that with this power of enclothed cognition, by you putting on something, you're actually changing at an unconscious level the way that you're about to go and act.
Dude, I'm so with you.
Yeah. So there was, I've done, for the longest time, my whole alter ego method that I would use with athletes was like my 11 herbs and spices. Like I kept it locked away. I didn't talk about it very much because I became well known at like really high levels in sport as the guy. I'm the quick hit artist. I'm the quick change guy. Like when someone's playing at the US Open on Saturday and they're in a rut right now on a Wednesday, meditation, undoubtedly, it is a core pillar practice that we put in place for everybody. I've been talking about meditation since 97 when yoga wasn't cool, right? Because there's just nothing that can help align the mental, the emotional, and the physical self better than meditation. But Meditation ain't a quick hit thing. So, I didn't talk about, on stages and very much around the idea of an alter ego because I really didn't want some of my compatriots to latch onto it. So, but I'd done a speech and word got back to this lady in University of Minnesota, at least that's the story that I was told. And she did this great little study with 4 to 6 year old kids where they brought them into this room and there was this kind of puzzle with a whole bunch of padlocks on it. And they gave all the kids this ring of keys to unlock all the padlocks, okay? But they divided them up into groups of 3. And one group, they were just in their plain clothes and given the keys. And then another group, they were told to pretend like their favorite superhero or someone that they look up to, favorite superhero. So then they do it. And then another group, they brought in a rack of clothing and there was Batman and Dora the Explorer costumes. And they said, put on the costume and then here's the keys and let's go on with those costumes. Fascinating what happened. The kids that were just in their plain clothes quit on the task of opening all the padlocks because the keys that they had didn't open any of the locks. It was a red herring. They just wanted to see with frustration how long they were going to last. So they quit the first. They were the first ones to quit. So what's that measuring? Grit and perseverance. 2 things that, we all talk about all the time of just what it takes in order to achieve something.
Right.
Because you're going to need it. Now, the young kids that pretended to be Batman or whatever their favorite superhero was, they lasted longer, but they didn't last as long as the kids who had on the costume or the uniform.
That is fucking so interesting.
But here's the other side effect of it. They weren't expecting to be tracking self-talk. So how kids were talking about them, because young kids, if you're around them, they don't just keep the thoughts in their head. They're talking it out loud. It's like when they meet someone who's chubby or they're like, oh, why is he so fat? Like, it's just, you're like, oh, it's just, please just, have some social decorum. So the young kids that were just in their plain clothes would say like, oh, I'm not good at puzzles, or I can't get this. I quit. Okay. So I can't get this. I quit. I'm not good at puzzles. Kids who were wearing the uniform though, they would say things like, Batman wouldn't quit, so I'm not going to quit. Dora the Explorer always finds a way, so I'm going to find a way. Right? They had now disassociated from whatever their own identity was. And they started acting through these other traits of Dora, of Batman. That's kind of like me sort of putting together the pieces for everyone around why using a totem, an artifact, some sort of object is so important to help you activate those traits from the person or the thing that you're most inspired by. I want you to have an emotional connection with this new identity. That's why grandmas are chosen so often. I'm not saying like 50% of all alter egos. I'm saying if there's a category, they get chosen quite a bit because it's an easy emotional connection. That's why for that one lady, a lion wasn't going to work, but a buck did. Kobe Bryant's story of, Black Mamba. He's going through an extraordinarily challenging time when that sexual assault case was going against him. He was losing his edge, losing it. Felt like he was losing himself in it. He was losing his what? His identity. Watched Kill Bill, saw the Black Mamba in Kill Bill, and said, I'm going to be the Black Mamba on the court. I would put Kobe Bryant up against any, animal biologist on the planet for knowledge of a black mamba. He knows a lot about black mambas because when you find something that you resonate with, get to know as much as you can about it because it's like the grapple hooks. You start to get their story into you now because that's where you're going to start acting through is those qualities. So Beyonce, she created Sasha Fierce. She's one of the few people that actually just sort of out of thin air created something. A lot of people use and leverage something else. Like I talk about in the book with Bo Jackson using, his alter ego, which was a character in a horror movie. Yeah. When he stepped out.
Jason Voorhees.
Yeah. So my point about that was like, there is science and research behind it.
Yeah. Before we move off that, I want to talk about self-signaling. So this is a personal obsession of mine. So we did a whole clothing line at Impact 3. It's called the self-signaling line. And it was all things that you should be telling yourself. Where exactly the mantras and things that you should be thinking about, believing. Because to me, I feel very different if I'm wearing something that reminds me of something that is important to me.
Yeah.
So, and the notion of having a totem, like one of the things, a lot of people come to me, and the punchline of the reason from my perspective they're not getting where they want to get is they don't know how to desire, they don't know how to obsess, they don't know how to marinate in something. Like, you want this thing, well, you have to fucking like it. Like, it's really got to be a part of you. You've got to make it a core part of your identity.
Yeah.
And for you to make it a core part of your identity, you have to find ways to soak in it. And one of the ways is to have that totem, that artifact, a piece of clothes, whatever. You wear that, it becomes like your cape, or, you know, whatever the case may be. So, like, for instance, I wear a ring that has a robot face on it. It is arguably the most enjoyable thing I've ever purchased in my life. And for me, the robot is a symbol of creation, of being able to create something. The notion of being man-made.
Yeah.
And there's an island in Tokyo called Odaiba, which is a man-made island. And on that island, they have this giant Gundam robot that actually articulates and talks. And it is insanely cool to me.
Yeah.
And the whole notion of just like what man can do, like when they learn the things they need to learn, they have the skills have utility, they put them to use, they create an island out of nothing and then put upon that island a gigantic robot, which also is man-made. It's just like, there's something about the power of human ingenuity, of creation, of all that I love. And then it's a fucking giant robot, and I just like giant robots. And so I bought the ring. And I remember saying to my wife, Lisa, when I got it, I said, this is so silly and yet so powerful for me as like this incredible reminder.
Yeah.
And every time I feel its weight on my finger, I think about the grand ability for humans to create. Now, why is that important? I'm trying to build the next Disney. It is the most gigantic like undertaking that fits within my bailiwick. I will say that Elon trying to colonize Mars is a lot bigger, so I'm not saying it's the biggest ever, but in terms of like what I'm actually interested in, the skills that I want to acquire and all of that, it is a very big dream, and it'll take me a very long time to execute against. And so having this totem, having something that I can put on, having this thing, and the funny thing is, literally, because I'm telling you this story and I'm allowing myself to get animated and I'm allowing it to fill me up, I'm further reinforcing
100%
what it means. And so tomorrow when I put the ring on, like it's actually going to mean more to me tomorrow than it did today, because I'm reinforcing this notion, right? This is my grandma. I'm thinking about grandma. I'm trying to honor grandma. I have this ritual of putting the ring on.
And you should be touching it more as you're doing it and putting it on, sliding it back and forth. Because for me, you know, to that, like that's like that right there is amazing. Like that, I love that. Like for me, like starting out in business, 22, 21, looked like I was 12, maybe 10. I had a baby face, and I was so insecure about what other people were thinking of me. How could I go on stages and now talk about mental game? I haven't won 4 awards. I haven't written 3 books. I'm not 43 years old. I don't have a tweed jacket with leather patches on my elbows, all that kind of stuff. But the reality was I was really freaking good at getting across these principles that had helped me, because I'm not a physical specimen. I'm not 6'4", 240 pounds, but I played way bigger than my size was, and definitely got as much out of myself as I could in order to, you know, perform how I did in athletics. But I was so insecure about how young I looked. And it was stopping me from making the phone calls, booking the workshops, or, you know, getting clients, getting myself out there, whatever it was at the time. And I was like, wait a second. You used Geronimo as your alter ego on the football field. And I was like, why don't you use that, Todd? And I was like, wait a second, okay, well, Geronimo was a little bit rough. Doesn't quite work in business. So then I was like, well, you know, who or what am I really inspired by and would love to activate their qualities to help me get through this phase? And Benjamin Franklin, always loved Benjamin Franklin. Joseph Campbell, you know, one of my personal heroes, and Superman, like, you know, the 1980s, you know, Superman. And that was it. And I was like, okay, and because I had this whole ritual that I'd go through when I was in the locker room to get ready for football games. I'm like, well, what's my thing? I didn't call it a totem at the time, but what's my object? And it was going to be glasses, because I was going to do the reverse Clark Kent. You know, Superman put on glasses to become the mild-mannered version of himself, to be accepted by society and walk around. But I was already mild-mannered. I was already blending into the walls as oatmeal. That I didn't want that. So my glasses were going to activate that superhero self inside of myself. And so I went out and I bought a pair of non-prescription glasses. And that's what I wore. And I'd put those on and I would practice putting them on and feeling more, because I lacked confidence. I was indecisive, and I wasn't very articulate with, what I was, what I had to offer. So I wanted to be confident, decisive, and articulate. That's who I wanted to be. And I knew that the people that were going to hire me, they wanted that too. Because anyone who's trying to hire someone who has an expertise in something, what they're actually hiring is certainty and confidence and clarity. Those, like, when someone shows up and you're like, whew, like, I feel like if I had that guy on my team or that woman on my team, we're going to make it happen. So you need to show up that way. And so I practiced putting those on. My point about this was getting to your whole, when you put that on tomorrow, that trigger, it's just being embedded, that emotional charge that you get. The act of this little arm sliding across here, because now I just wear glasses just for dress. I don't need them to step into that confidence, articulate self. Now I just use it for dress. But even now when I do this, it's like a switch is getting flipped, and I'm being very intentional because I want to be intentional. When I show up whether it's a leader for my team, or when I'm showing up on a call where we're going to close a new team to work with or a new client or something like that, like I want to show up as my absolute best heroic self for that other individual, because I'm deeply driven by service. It runs deep in my family. I want to serve. I know that's you as well. Like, you want to serve, and then you're going to leave this amazing legacy for this thing that you built. That's what's so impressive.
I don't believe in legacy.
Yeah. Like, that's what's so impressive about Gaudi.
Who's Gaudi?
Gaudi, he started the construction of a church in the early 1900s, which, based on his design, was going to take 150 years to be built. The vision of that man to start working and laboring on something that he was personally never going to see the end of. People talk a lot about vision in business. He's the ultimate benchmark of vision. That is next level. I mean, it's still under construction outside of Barcelona, Spain, or in Barcelona. And, it's one of the most amazing structures that's on our planet right now. So, when you were doing that, I almost wanted to reach over and except it's going to look really weird on camera if I was doing that with you. But don't do that, Todd. That's a little bit too intimate. But it's just play with that on there.
It's interesting to me how it grows with power. Like, understanding how you can reinforce this stuff, how you can make it meaningful. There are so many. This word is played out, but there's so many hacks and things that people can do to reinforce this stuff. And I think all too often people look at somebody who's successful and they think, well, lucky them, it must be nice. They have this, that, or the other. They have the confidence, whatever, not realizing at some point you find a way, whether it's through physiological hooks, which that was a big one for me to lower my anxiety. So diaphragm breathing is a physiological hook into the parasympathetic nervous system, known as rest and digest. So if you're wondering, how the hell do I get out of this anxious, overamped state?
Sure.
There is a physiological hook, which is as you breathe from your diaphragm, whether you want to or not, you're going to begin sliding into that state.
Yeah.
And then there are some things that you just have to decide. So you talked about decisiveness. Decisiveness is intoxicating. When somebody has, they're gonna do it. They're convinced they can get other people on board. This is it. That level of clarity is so intoxicating to people. And when I do it for the team and they see it, I can feel them galvanizing behind the idea. And the thing is, I'm honest with them. I'm just fucking deciding. I'm just saying, there are 7 options before us. I don't fucking know which one is going to work.
Yeah.
But I'm not afraid to pick one.
Yeah.
And go with all my gusto. Now, I'm not going to pick one that's obviously bad.
Yeah.
So I'm picking one that I think has a shot. But what people allow themselves to do, they allow themselves to be paralyzed. They allow themselves to accept from themselves that, I don't know, I'm not sure. Fuck that. My whole thing is being unsure. You don't think I'm unsure? Yeah. You don't think I wonder if this is going to work.
Yeah.
But I've simply decided to value decisiveness. And once you say, okay, I'm gonna value this thing, then I'm going to act in accordance with it, which means, okay, I'm looking at 2 options. I'm not entirely sure which one. I'm going to go with A. Maybe I'm going with A because I have a lighter ring on that hand, and so it just felt better to point towards the one. Who the fuck knows? But I'm going to go with that. I'm going to be all in. I'm going to do everything I can to make it work, but I'm going to constantly look and see, is it actually working?
Yeah.
If it's not working, then I'm going to switch. So now I've got this dual thing, and my team knows, one, I'm not afraid to pick. I'm going to move forward. I will accept the consequences.
Yeah.
And I'm not a dumbass. So if it's not working,
yeah,
I'm going to move. But like what I love about your message is people at some point, they have to take responsibility for who they want to become, right?
Yes.
Your Cary Grant quote.
Yeah.
It's who you want to become. It's not necessarily who you are today,
Yeah.
but it is who you want to become. And at some point, you do have to take the first step into the unknown. You have to act as if, like you've got to put it out there. You've got to be decisive even when you're unsure. You've got to move forward. You've got to project confidence so that you can begin to really feel and internalize the confidence. You've got to have the physical thing, whether it's turning your talisman or having it in your pocket and rubbing it over. But understanding that whether it's the buck imagery, whether it's your robot ring, you have to infuse it with meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that you said that Kobe knows more about the Black Mamba than anybody else, it's like, that's how you infuse it with meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to ping off with it. I want to go back to when you said that when you put on your ring, you're like, and you said to your wife, like, this is going to be silly. There's actually, I mean, we're having a serious conversation about deep and meaningful things that we hope that at least one person that's listening or watching is going to like make a paradigm shift, and just all of a sudden a new world's going to show up for them. But one thing I want to reinforce with people is one of the great powers of this idea, or one of the great powers that human beings have, is playfulness. The thing I love about this idea, and I could see with people, is I could see stress and anxiety melt away when they started to get engaged with the idea and see how playful it is to know that this is your, again, I am the person standing out in front of other people talking about the power of alter egos. I don't care that people know that the glasses that I wear are not real. Like, it's just wear them for dress. I don't care about that, because I'll use them as a signal and a totem to tell other people that I don't care. But you do know that I am being very intentional about, I want to bring my best self so I can serve you in this moment. That's why they're there. But it's that when I could see someone really understand that this is them being playful. It's like, you don't even know that I'm showing up as Batman in this moment when I'm in the boardroom right now. Like that playful idea, because playfulness, the whole reason that I'm doing this is because I want to get my clients, the people that buy our training programs and whatnot, to get to that zone and flow state. That zone and flow state where every capability that you have comes flowing out of you unhindered by the resistance that, or the judgment, or the self-talk that typically slows you down. That's the reason that we do this. Playfulness is the key that unlocks the back door to peak performance, and we're walking through the doorway of our creative imagination to make that happen. That is our superpower. The best genre of movies right now, superhero movies, that Marvel comic, that DC comic world that's out there. Why? Because there's this natural hero's journey narrative that we latch onto with it. Also, we love the fantasy idea in our mind of like, what would I have if I had a superpower? But we forget, we do. Human beings do. We're the only living thing on this planet with this one ability. It's not love. It's not affection. Am I saying that they're not powerful? 100% they are. But nothing else on this planet has creative imagination. Nothing else on this planet can choose to, in the moment, decide to be someone or something else. Can make, a heaven from hell or a hell from heaven. We have that ability. You've got two people, the same experience is happening to them. One chooses a completely different path and they, strive and they thrive. Another one gets crippled by it. That's fascinating to me. That's fascinating that we can do that our creative imagination builds story and narrative in our own minds.
Yeah, that's crazy. Have you read The Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela?
No, I haven't.
Oh, yet. Dude, fucking read that book. It's crazy. So I read Joseph Campbell when I must have been in my late teens, early 20s, something like that. And he talked about how, rituals really lost. And he thought that was a big part of why adolescence had become stunted. Like there was no grand moment where you knew like, hey, you're different. And he was like, there were societies that used to take teenagers out into the woods and they would literally kick their teeth in.
Yeah.
You had people that would circumcised adults with no anesthetic, or not adults, but a 13-year-old. And you went through something hard. And by going through that thing, like, you knew, okay, on the other side of this, I'm a different person.
Yeah.
And so in Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela was one of the last generations that went through this thing. And they took 3 or 4 boys at once that were all, I think, 13, and they have them sit down with their legs splayed, and elder comes along with a really sharp rock, and the kids are sitting there buck naked in front of the whole tribe. Yeah. And the guy comes up, grabs their foreskin, and just cuts it off with the rock. And then they have to yell. I think they have to throw their arm up and yell this warrior's creed statement.
Statement. Yeah.
And I just thought, whoa, in that moment. Yeah. Because the moment is imbued with so much meaning, and there are people there, and it is ritualistic.
Visceral.
It's 1,000%. Once you're on the other side of that, you really do, something kicks in and makes you feel differently. And so when I got married, I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to be ritualistically scarred. Yeah. And so, because I wanted to be a different person before and a different person after. And so I ended up getting tattooed. It's the only tattoo that I have. Yeah. And I wanted something that was painful. And at the time, I was just absolutely terrified of needles. Yeah. So doing something that was facing this gigantic fear that I knew was going to be painful and that was going to leave a permanent scar on my body, it carried all this weight and this emotion for me. But it goes back to that notion of what is it imbued with? And so really being conscious of grabbing a hold of that narrative, understanding what that narrative is, understanding that humans are meaning-making machines. Yes. That's what we do all day long. And when you can take a hold of that in your own life. You don't have to wait for, nobody told me to get the tattoo, right? So it was just in your own life, where's an area where you can apply a different meaning, a new meaning, a more powerful meaning to what you're doing that's going to give you that direction and purpose, that's going to allow you to step into your inner superhero or whatever, but it's going to give new meaning to what you're doing, which elevates its importance, which gives it a lasting impact, which then gives it the ability to sort of pull you through difficult times where maybe you're indecisive, or times where you're feeling weak or whatever. You've got this thing to fall back on, that narrative. And do you know Yuval Noah Harari?
Yes.
Oh, man. So as you know, his work around humans and narrative and the way that societies are organized around those narratives, it's really pretty extraordinary.
Well, and that gets to my point, when I was talking about the whole, when you build out that identity model at that core driver's layer, that societal narrative that sits there, people don't realize that it can be a dome or a glass ceiling that they don't even realize is stopping them until.
Give me an example of a time where it holds somebody back.
Yeah. So, there is a client, I'll use an example of a client in New York, a Jewish woman who, grew up in an environment where in her particular kind of tribe, the female shouldn't be making as much money as the male counterparts. Okay? It's not even just the Jewish community. It's pervasive in, other white communities and Catholic and Christian communities. So, but again, that's why I say, in the book, I talk about the two selves. There's the trapped self, which ends up happening when you have this outside-in pressure that, when you're trying to worry about other people and you feel trapped because you know that all of you isn't getting out there somehow. And then there's the other side, which is this heroic self. And the heroic self isn't that you're a hero, but you feel heroic in the moment because whether or not you got the result that you're looking for, you acted the way that you wanted to. Whether it was you in a moment sticking up for a friend who someone else was, lobbing insults at, and you got in there and is you taking a stand saying, you don't do that, or whatever your response is in that moment, or you raising your hand in a meeting and voicing your concern when typically you would stay trapped because you don't want to say something in front of your boss. That feels heroic to you. So for her, she had this huge aspiration and desire to continuously grow her business, but she was stunting it because if she made even $1,000 more, she was going to surpass her husband. And And she was making all these assumptions without even talking to her husband.
Was she unaware of it, or did she know?
She was unaware of it.
I don't want to.
She was unaware that was actually the thing. She was, using other things as the reasons why her business wasn't growing. I can't find the right customers, Todd. I don't think my marketing's really working right now.
What was it that she said or did that got you to that realization?
So this is where just the experience that I have of knowing that, there's a lot of things that are hidden from people that they don't realize. Me knowing that she's...
What do you look for, though? Are you looking at body language? Are you looking at word choice?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at I'm looking at the identity of the person. So she's a Jewish woman. I know kind of the group that she, lives inside of. So right away, that's why it's so important for us, I think, for people to help make change, that I need to consume as much as I possibly can around cultural narratives. Like, I've worked in 86 countries around the world.
Whoa.
Like, not by phone, traveled to Kazakhstan. I've worked in every Istan that there is: Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. So I've been, and when you work inside those cultures, it's very different than traveling there as a tourist. We get to work inside, then you get to really see how they're, coexisting and whatnot. So it's important for me to just really dive deep into all these different, worlds that are different from mine, so that I can pick up on them far more quickly. So I can, because I want to be known as someone who can make change happen fast. A lot of people don't want that because it places an expectation on you. I want the expectation. I'm a tiger. I want to hunt that down. I want to get the kill for you faster than someone else. I want that moniker placed on me. A lot of people don't want it. No, I want it. And that's what winners do. Winners want that. Winners want that final play that's drawn up with 2.5 seconds left and the coach saying, you're getting the ball. I want the ball. And everyone that's watching this and listening to this, they should want the ball too. The moment that you make the decision that you want the ball, all bets are off. Boy, like I get chills. I got chills because it's amazing when someone makes that shift. Like you were talking about with decision. When you decide. Now we use it's a platitude. We say, man, when you decide to take responsibility for your life, hey, that's wonderful. So those are great platitudes. Me, I want meat and potatoes. I want to give you something that helps you truly embody that. And for me, it's I get right now that you can't see yourself making that change. But what I do know is you have the capacity and abilities gifted with you as a human being to start acting to and through some other identity, someone else that you're inspired by. And whether you use glasses to activate that, whether you use a robot ring, whether you use a picture of your grandma on the table, whether you use a Wonder Woman bracelet like one of my equestrian clients uses when she activates Wonder Woman when she gets on that horse, think about that as a sport. It's the only sport where you have another animal that most beautifully transmutes your emotional state to everyone else.
Yeah, talk to me about that. So horses are fucking weird, man. So how is it that they're picking up on so much human emotion?
Well, who knows? I am not the expert on definitely all things emotional around horses, but they have this phenomenal capacity to detect your energy field. That's why they're used in so many different types of therapy, whether it's around autism or whether it's around, helping people overcome PTSD and trauma. They're just these walking caretakers. They're phenomenal. Like, I grew up on a big ranch. I had, 3 horses of my own, Cracker Jack, Sox, and Midnight. And, the lesson that my father gave me early on was if you're ever out on the farm in the ranch and you get lost, just ask them to go back home. And that's the thing. If you're ever lost in the wilderness and you happen to have a horse with you, follow the horse. The horse will take you back to some place and something or someone. And but getting back to my client, she was someone who was a type A personality, ran her own business, and kind of operated in novice competitions in the category of dressage. So it's basically like intricate. You're doing intricate moves out on in this arena where every single little subtle movement on your part and the horse's part is being graded, right? So you got people watching you and judging you. Well, that's already going to trigger some anxiety in people. So if you're getting on this horse that beautifully transmutes your emotional state and you're someone who's anxious, now the horse is anxious. It's not going to hit its mark. And so when talking to my client, and I asked her, I'm like, okay, get it. Lisa, you're anxious. But what I do know is there is a version of you right now that isn't anxious. Now, who could we use to activate that non-anxious person? Now, who do you look at that you admire the way that they show up? And immediately it was Linda Carter. Linda Carter's version of Wonder Woman, because this is before the new Wonder Woman movie that came out.
Right.
This is several years ago. And I said, well, why? What is it about Linda? Like, and I mean, I do it in a way where I want to challenge people like, that sounds cliche. That's boring or whatever, because I want them to sell me on it.
Right.
Because again, I want that emotional charge happening inside of them. So why Linda Carter? Because she stands her ground no matter what's happening around her. She owns the space that she's in. It doesn't matter. She moves forward all the time. She never retreats. But it's this, and I didn't need her because words are clumsy for us. And I was like, all I care about is that I see that there's an emotional state change for her, that she gets it on the inside. I'm like, I get it. Say no more. Because I don't want her to talk herself out of it even.
Right.
So that was it. So we went out, and that was the ritual now. Before she got on the horse, she would snap, and I tell her, make sure that the clasp that you get, because she made a custom-made bracelet, make sure that clasp is like, it makes a sound, because sound is a phenomenal trigger to the human brain. Like, and so when you hear that snap, boom, that's when Wonder Woman takes over. But you got to honor her, because Linda Carter would never, ever go out on that horse and not own that routine, own sitting on top of that horse, and let your horse know that you got this. Make it relax and confident in the routine. Her trainer is the world's top dressage trainer. He's got a barn out in Connecticut. He's got the most world champions that train out of his barn. He called me up 10 months into us working together, and my client asked if it was okay if they connected. I said, yeah, absolutely. And he said, Todd, I got to say, I don't get this. I don't get how this person who is always kind of in the average is now winning the championships around the world. It doesn't make sense that someone can ascend that quickly. And I was like, nothing about human beings makes sense. But our jobs as people who coach and train and mentor and advise other people is to make sure that we don't look at someone as someone we need to fix. Is that we don't need to tell them that there's something outside of them that they need to go and get or acquire in order for them to be better, be whole, or whatever. I treat you like everything that you've got in order to be successful right now is already there. It's just under a bunch of muck and mire, a bunch of dust. It's under a bunch of story, a bunch of narrative, that if we cut those strings, those puppet strings, those invisible strings that are stopping you or preventing you or making you behave in a certain way, that all of a sudden this new possibility comes out of you. And anyway, he was so I explained to him like the process of how I was working with her and what we were actually doing behind the scenes. And so I said, it's not, Sarah up on that horse. That's Wonder Woman up on that horse. And she owns that. She 100% owns it. That's who's up there competing, is Wonder Woman. And she loves that playful idea in her mind that no one knows that Linda Carter and Wonder Woman are up there competing. It looks like Sarah, but it's not.
Talk to me about Olympians and pressure. This is something that I think a lot about, like the amount that's on the line for somebody to make a mistake. A tenth of a second's the difference between $10 million in endorsements and a life of absolute obscurity. Mm-hmm. How do the best of the best deal with that? Yeah.
So pressure is an interesting thing. I don't let the idea of pressure live inside of my universe. It's not gravity in this world. Pressure is, everyone talks about it as if it's real. And it's not. Pressure is something that you are somehow applying to yourself based on the moment and the story that you're wrapping around. So like, we can't have one without the other. Like, we can't talk about how story and narrative is what human beings do, and then we can't talk about how maybe something doesn't exist. Maybe pressure doesn't exist. Because pressure is what? Meaning that you're attaching to an event. What if we were so deliberate and intentional about the meaning that we were always attaching to events that it didn't create pressure for ourselves, but it created something else? Now, I'm not saying pressure doesn't exist for other people. 100% it does. But it was their creation, not my creation. But yes, there are moments that can be filled with stress and anxiety if you allow them to. Like when I have a skier who is pointing their tips down the face of a slope that looks like a cliff and it's filled with ice, basically, based on the amount of athletes that already went in front of them. And they've got to make tight turns around flags. And the only thing stopping them is some orange plastic netting that's running along the sign. If you do not have 100% complete and utter trust, trust is the key. That's what we're pursuing. Trust. When you trust yourself, when you trust your preparation, when you trust your routines, that's when you now opened up the doorway for a personal best to happen. But the only way that we can get there is through us focusing on the process all the way down the hill. The greatest example of someone in the final moment of a competition losing their focus on what they were doing and seeing if they won was the great race between Michael Phelps and I think it was the Czech swimmer at the Beijing Games, when he was beating Phelps throughout the entire race, dominating. And in the last lap, Phelps is making a comeback, and it's going to be like a photo finish at the end. And they both come to the wall. The guy is in front of Phelps, and as he's coming to reach towards the wall, he immediately pops his head up before he's hit the wall. And when you pop your head up, what happens? Shoulders come back. When your shoulders come back, well, your arms are attached to your shoulders. So what do? They come back too. And Phelps drove through the wall, and he beat him by, I think it's 0.02 of a second.
Wow.
That's the difference, to your point, about someone who gets the gold and someone who gets the silver, who wins and someone who loses in that instant. I thought it was, and I use that example all the time, and I play the video in different presentations of just like, and my point about it is the difference of to and through. Because I love just getting people to think about words.
What would you tell that guy? Like, how do you rebuild that guy? The guy that loses. That story is interesting to me. Do you know anything about him? Like, where is he at now? What's he doing?
Yeah.
How does he think of himself?
Oh, he can
how does he
continue
think
to
of
compete and continue to compete at a high level.
Okay.
But it's like, you lost that race. That version of you lost that race. So like, I'm always playing, it's like, so we've got an opportunity and a decision right now that you get to make is the current version of you that just lost that race because you did that. Like, that's the you that showed up. You lost that race. Are you going to carry that identity forward, or are you going to take that? Because there's winners, there's losers, and there's learners. Which one are you going to be?
Yeah, man. Like, look, I am so with you. I totally agree. That's how I process life. 1,000%. When I see stuff like that happen, it sounds like this guy's okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
But man, so many people end up allowing that loss to become the defining moment of their life.
Yeah.
That shit is scary. I had Nastia Lukin on Impact Theory, and she was, I think it was a qualifying round for the Olympics, and she does move and literally misses the bar and just smacks flat. And the thing I found so interesting about her was that was what everybody was trying to make her story.
Yes.
But she didn't. She didn't make it her story. She was able to learn from it and move on. I'm sure she was absolutely devastated. But she just sort of picked herself up, brushed herself off, finished the routine, got back up on the bars. So there's no way to win now.
Yeah.
But she got back up on the bars, finished the routine. And so it was like there was something about being consistent with who she wanted to be, even though she lost.
Yeah.
That was like a bigger narrative than the falling narrative.
Yeah. Well, but again, this gets back to the problem that we have. Again, those of us that will operate at an elite level, we operate in a completely different set of rules than what the rest of society continuously perpetuates with the narratives of winning and losing or lost. Yeah. So the average folk out there are going to look at that and say she lost, but that's not really how we process things at the elite level, because there's practice, there's process, there's next. Like, none of these things define you. If you want to allow all of the wins and losses to define you, then you're operating from an outcome oriented perspective. The best of the best stay very much internal. They're very much process oriented. Jerry Rice, great example. Like, I was at a training session with Jerry Rice when he retired, and there was young 22, 23-year-olds that were about to do the Jerry Rice famous practice. None of them lasted. He was retired and in some cases 25 years older than the other kids, and they didn't last.
I've heard about his workouts being just absolutely legendary.
Yeah, and his just mindset was like, to everyone else, you don't have what it takes. You can't be Jerry.
Was he somebody like Kobe, where it was like, I need you to understand, I'm going to outwork you?
Yes.
That was part of his shtick?
Big time. I mean, if there was a knock against Jerry wasn't a team guy. He's not like a locker room guy. He's not someone that you can like laugh and joke around and have fun with. I mean, Deion Sanders talks about it quite a bit. They didn't really get along when he was at the 49ers. But, if you're looking at just pure excellence on the field of play, Jerry put in the work. Yeah. But I want to get back to that narrative that is just pervasive, and it's so frustrating for me because I see so many people, they consume media or they listen to the prognosticators on television when they're talking about sport, and just 90% of the time, that's not actually what any of the athletes are ever thinking. It's like, even what people don't get is getting to the Olympics is the win. You're not an Olympian. You're always an Olympian. When you meet someone who is at the 1972 Olympics, you refer to them as an Olympian. It's present tense always. You will always be an Olympian. Okay? And so, but in order to draw viewers' eyeballs in, you've got to create stories around, Nastia Lukin's process of how she got there and the story of where she came from, or Simone Biles or Michael Phelps, or insert the name of anyone and anything. But the reality is, like, we're there to create personal best. And if your personal best is good enough to get you on the podium, amazing. But truly, the athlete who goes there with the intention of just winning the medals, their focus is on the wrong thing. And it sounds completely counterproductive to what everyone keeps on saying about how winners think, the Vince Lombardi quote of, now it just left my mind, but it's his famous quote around, winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. Well, it's taken out of context. There's actually a larger quote that's there.
Do you remember it? Because I would love to.
Yeah, I'm failing with my
while you think of it, what's interesting to me is I think it probably has more to do with your perspective going into it. So if your perspective going in is I've got a shot at the gold and you walk away in 5th place, something tells me that is going to be utterly heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. But if you think you're going to be in 9th place and you end up in 5th place, then it's going to be like, oh my God, the greatest thing. And for the rest of your life, when somebody calls you an Olympian, it's like, hey, I did great. So some of this, I think, there are so many stories of triumph and so many stories of just devastating loss that are tied to the Olympics. And if I had to guess, you could do a pretty powerful expose on people who were ruined by the Olympics, just emotionally, that they never recover. And obviously it comes down to the story. It comes down to the values that they have around winning. It comes down to the messy reality of what were their parents saying? Were they pushing them from an early age? Yeah. Did they accidentally allow themselves or forcefully in, when you get some of these young gymnasts where a parent is saying you're only valuable if you're winning. Mm-hmm. And it becomes such an ingrained part of who you are. Like, you are destined to win. Getting a gold is why you exist. It's why you've spent 10 years training this just ungodly pace, giving up your childhood. And when it doesn't pan out, it's like, man, at some point, like, that shit is going to be really hard to get over. And this is the same thing happens in business, where people, like, a win is the only reason you're doing it. Mm-hmm. You're doing it so that you can get the money. Mm-hmm. And trust me, as somebody who spent almost a decade doing that, I fully understand. But the money's not guaranteed. The struggle is. And so if you aren't able to really love the struggle, to get into it, to push yourself, to have an identity that's around something other than the victory itself. Like, one thing people should check themselves against is, does the thing that I love can it be aimed at something else, or is it the thing itself? So for instance, I was just at Tony Gonzalez's house, one of the greatest football players of all time, just inducted into the Hall of Fame. Fucking super interesting guy. Love that guy to death. Such a good dude.
Yeah.
And part of his struggle was that what he was doing was aimed at the thing. It was aimed at being a football player. And for like 3 years after he finished playing, he slid into a depression because he didn't know who he was without football.
Exactly.
And I thought, wow. If, on the other hand, because what he actually did something very interesting. When he was in college, I think he was far more interested in basketball than he was football. Yeah. But for whatever reason, something happened, and in his words, basketball was taken from me. I don't remember what happened, but he ends up getting into football, and he goes through this process of realizing I can fall in love with football. I can actually fall in love with this the way that I fell in love with basketball. I can, because he said I used to love the smell of the basketball, the way it smelled on my hands, like dribbling the ball everywhere, just like everything. I was obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's so interesting that you could make the transition from basketball to football, and you found a way to fall in love with football. Because he said for years in football, he didn't love it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until he thought, wait a second, all the things that allowed me to love basketball and fall in love with it and be obsessed and all of that, I could translate that over into football.
Yeah.
But when he got out, he didn't do the same thing with broadcasting. And so for the first few years that he was broadcasting, he said, I didn't love it. And it's only now that I'm realizing, wait a second, this is like a pattern. And if I can find a way to love it, then, I can really enjoy this next phase of my life.
Yeah.
But my heartbreak for people is you're never able to build a belief system, a value structure, identity that's bigger than the way it made you feel when you thought you were going to get the gold, when you thought you were going to win, when you thought you were going to be valedictorian, when you thought, in my own case, you thought you were going to be the next Spielberg, right? Like all these things. And then what do you do when that's not how things play out? Like, do you go in a dark place? Like, do you become obsessed with who you could have been? Are you given the on the waterfront speech, I could have been a contender? Like, is that where you go? Or do you find a way to say, okay, hold on. I recognize this is a value system. I can no longer value those things. Like, I thought a lot about, like, what would happen if I'm building impact theory and it doesn't fail to get off the ground worse. It really starts to go somewhere and then it implodes. Like, what does my life look like then?
Yeah.
How do I respond to that? Now, the good news for me is that I don't allow, even though, trust me, like a black hole's worth of center of gravity, like, it is so tempting. It's so easy to just slip into that notion to be, I am what I've accomplished.
Yeah.
But when you have a narrative that you're telling yourself that is something different, that keeps you from being sucked into that black hole, that you're reminding yourself of constantly, which for me, it's I'm the learner. And as long as I love what I'm doing, then I'm going to keep doing it. And the second that I don't, I'll happily change direction. That's a core part of who I am and what I tell myself and what I tell the people around me. And so I'm reinforcing it as I articulate it out loud. Like, doing all of that gives you some protection from that. But I get, like, there is something about the human condition that makes that neurologically very difficult to fail publicly, to fail at something that you've been moving towards your whole life, that you gave yourself over to. You allowed yourself to say, I'm going to win a gold medal. Yeah. And then poof, it's gone.
Yeah. Well, to your conversation around Tony, it became later in my career, but that was like a bread and butter, was like helping athletes transition out of, what that next phase was going to be, because for the longest time you're described as a football player. Or, in the book at the beginning of chapter 3, I talk about the tennis player who won the collegiate championship, but just fundamentally burned out of tennis because when he was losing, he felt like he was failing as a human being, because everything, all of his identity was wrapped up in being a tennis player. And that's why the message is so important for me, because I want people to have a way healthier mental health for themselves, is seeing that, no, you're many identities. And when you realize that there's many roles that you're playing in life, we can start to separate these things, so that when you've got one role that might not be going well for you right now, entrepreneurship, you're not failing as a human being. And you're struggling right now in it. But that doesn't mean you need to go and fail at being a father, fail at being a husband, and all these things.
It's super interesting. Do you know Robert Sapolsky?
No.
He's a professor at Stanford. This guy's fucking interesting. Go watch every YouTube video he's ever done. This guy's so incredible. So he researched baboons for like 20 years or something. Mm-hmm. And he said the baboons are, they will chill you to your core with how much human behavior you will recognize in them.
Yeah.
And the baboon troop that he followed, they were a very successful troop. They only had to work about 3 hours a day to get their food. So they had something like 8 hours worth of daylight where they could just, as he said, be really shitty to each other.
Yeah.
And he said they would just like develop these crazy hierarchies, and where you fell in the hierarchy, if it wasn't a stable hierarchy, meaning from one day to the next, you didn't know who you were above, who you were below, and there was like constant fighting over it. He said their stress levels were absolutely insane. And, you know, I can't remember if he said they actually die of stress-related disease, but he said they would dart them and then check their levels. And he said it was crazy. They're just like, their immune systems were really suppressed because they had so much stress and anxiety over where they fell in the hierarchy. And he said, you see the exact same thing in humans with one fascinating exception. Humans have multiple hierarchies. So if you hate your fucking job, you're low man on the totem pole at work, but you're the deacon of your church, he said those people are going to tell you all day long how working from 9 to 5 is total bullshit. You're just being taken advantage of. It's garbage. But if you were the deacon of the church, then it was like, oh, you had all these amazing things to say about being a deacon at the church. I thought, fuck, I never thought of that before. The way that we're always looking to say, okay, much like we have different identities, we belong to different competence hierarchies. Yeah. And based on what one feels good, we're going to put all of our time and energy into that basket. When you think about, like, nerds now take on a different context, but when we were growing up in the 80s, being a nerd was not cool. But within its own ecosystem, it actually was. So, like, I was a band nerd. But within band, like, then there's a whole different pecking order. And so the rest of the world may think that you're, super lame. But in the band, it's like, hey, I'm doing all right. Yeah. It's really interesting. And there's something about actually having the awareness of, hey, if things aren't going well in one or multiple areas, finding an area where you can shine and engaging in that could have an immeasurably powerful impact on your overall well-being. Yeah. And one thing that Sapolsky said is the key thing to understand is that you would think, if I described to you the effects of being low in a hierarchy, that you would want to be a high-ranking baboon within the group. But he said that actually isn't the thing that has the most well-being. What has the most well-being is somebody that's in a stable hierarchy, regardless of where they are, and they have the most social relationships. And when you're in a stable hierarchy, even if you're low, but you have a lot of social contacts, then that actually has a greater impact on your well-being than just being high ranking. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really interesting.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up too, because you brought up the social relationship side of things. And when you look at any of the long-term studies that have been done on the quality of lives of people, that when they get to the end of their lives, and they've had, whether it's a lot of success or they grade themselves as having a successful life or what have you, there's really only one, out of all the different studies, there's only really one consistent theme amongst the people that have had both a successful life, had a high quality of life, and are living what would be considered a joyful experience, and that is the quality of their relationships. Yeah. Right. And so I want to bring that up because we're talking so much about someone making change happen and shifting and doing the work or whatever. But I think the great mistake, I did this early on, and I am a huge byproduct of mentorship, apprenticeship. It's one thing that's massively lost nowadays, is everyone's trying to race to the finish line of success so that they can have some sort of status and label on themselves, as opposed to just going in and tucking yourself underneath the wing of someone who's doing the work that you want to go and do. Like, there's a reason why the Renaissance is still graded as the greatest history in art history, and it was built off of apprenticeship. With Michelangelo and Leonardo and Da Vinci, like all of these amazing names were within 10 years of each other.
Do you know that those two hated each other?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, it's fucking fascinating. The documentary, the biography that Walter Isaacson wrote about Leonardo da Vinci. He goes into that and how everybody fucking hated Michelangelo. And I guess he had a deformed nose because he was such a dick that someone just walked up and fucking smashed him in the face.
That's amazing.
And yeah, his nose then healed funny.
Weird.
And that was it. And he was like a total loner and nobody wanted to be around him, but fuck, what a genius.
Yeah.
But dude, I was going to nod. I thought my head was going to fall off. I was nodding so hard. I so agree. My whole thing with, I love social media. I think it's actually super powerful. It is very dangerous and it's a bit like a gun. And if you use it inappropriately, you're going to fucking kill yourself.
Yeah.
But if you know how to use it, it can be an incredible tool. And one of the things that makes me very sad about social media, despite it being so incredibly powerful, is people want to be heard instead of getting good. And I'll get people like, I meet people every now and then, and shout out to my boy at Avra here in Beverly Hills, who I met. And he was like, dude, I love the show. I watch it all the time. And I had this, when I meet people like that out in the wild who are into the show, I'm like, fuck, okay, I have like 30 seconds with this person. I want to change their life, right? Going back to what you said earlier. I want the 6 fucking words that are like going to change this person forever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, it all starts with your goals. What are your goals? And he was like, I want to make videos that inspire people. And I was like, God damn it. I'm like, here's how you end up making videos that inspire people. You go get good at something. Because here's the truth. If you're just trying to parrot back all the things that you've heard from people that have gone and got extraordinary something, it just won't, it won't have the richness.
Because it's lacking the nuance. It has no depth.
You have learned things that I have not learned. In your experience, you fought and struggled and all that. And sort of on paper, you could probably describe us as, they essentially went through the same thing, right? Trying to achieve greatness in a field and all that, coming out of nowhere, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, in going through that process, things occurred to you that didn't occur to me, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes it interesting. I'm like, until you've gone out into the wilderness and done your thing, there's like nothing to bring back to the tribe.
Yeah.
So it's like, the videos are going to take care of themselves. Either you're going to get extraordinary at something and really learn some shit, and then people are really going to want to listen to you, or you're not. Like there are people out there that aren't necessarily super charismatic or dynamic, but God damn it, they've learned something. And I want to listen to those motherfuckers all day because it's like, whoa, you've got some insights into things I've never thought of, man. And what you've done, in fact, this is it. When somebody writes a book or creates a video, what they're trying to do is distill down everything they've learned over the last 20, 30 years and make it digestible for you. If they haven't done anything for the last 20 or 30 years, they have nothing to digest or give you to digest. It's like,
which is a lot of books though. There's a lot of books. That's my problem with the leadership, personal and self-help space is, there's a recipe. How do you gain authority, gain influence? You write a book. And so someone who's a year and a half, 2 years in, because now it's a hell of a lot easier to write books with the amount of like writing services that are out there and ghostwriters and this and that. And so you've got people who read like the 3 contemporary or past bestsellers on the topic, and then they're going to go and iterate on it and give their viewpoint. And it's just, and people start propagating and permeating these same ideas. And when you actually look at a lot, that's why I've got such an issue with the industry, is because there are very few books that have become mainstream that are written by practitioners, the ones that have done the work. And I'm not even talking researchers, because standing on the sidelines and seeing how a football player is approaching their career and you take down your notes and maybe you do a couple of interviews, is way different than the person who's been working with thousands of them one-on-one and seeing, well, what they say in the press conference and what they actually do behind the scenes are 2 very different things. The alter ego stuff, this is the thing that people actually do to help go and achieve amazing things. It's never been articulated because it's a private experience that people don't go and talk about. Beyonce was rare in that she let it out and told people. What people don't understand is she was crucified on blogs and many other things by whether it's evangelical right or even the African-American community about being inauthentic and why would she even need to go and do that? Couldn't she just be herself? Listen, I get it. Beautiful idea. Be yourself, gang. How's that fucking working for you? It's not. Like, enough with all these shitty platitudes that don't mean anything. Like inauthenticity. What a shitty term. Like, I'm sick and tired of authenticity, authentic self. There's no such thing as the authentic self, because there is no self. There is no you, right? Like,
I was with you right till then.
No,
I think there is something about, I'll call it the integrated self, right? Where there's definitely, like, even my robot thing, okay? My robot thing, well, it's not quite an alter ego. It's a totem, and it reminds me of something. It's very real and very true to myself, even though I built in the meaning to that. So like when you were giving me the Linda Carter thing, I thought, it's actually really interesting as people are revealing themselves in the thing that they choose.
Yes.
So there is still, to me, authenticity, I guess, is like a trigger for me, because I feel very grossed out when other people, I can tell you're pandering, you're presenting something that isn't real.
Yeah.
And so I think that being who you are is the only way to build a strong sense of self. Okay, that didn't work. Let me explain it another way. The second I start trying to act like I know something that I don't, I get anxious.
Yeah.
And so anxiety has become this amazing invisible fence that keeps me authentic. And when I was younger, I was prone to like trying to, flex my muscles and like be a little bit bigger than I really was. And it made me feel gross. And I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And so once I stopped doing that, and I was like, this is where I'm actually at. This is what I actually understand. This is what I don't understand. I try to call out, like, when I start, like, because there are ideas I'm excited about, but I don't really understand yet.
Yeah.
And so I'll try to flag them as like, fuck, this is so interesting to me. But I'm now at the edge of what I understand, and I'm just sort of talking. But being true to who you are, like even this show. So I had real... not hesitation about doing the show, but the thing about doing this show in particular was, on impact theory, if I disagree with you, then I'm just going to be quiet. I'm going to let you say your piece, and maybe it resonates with somebody else, and that's that. But on this, I was like, if I don't agree, I'm going to tell somebody I don't agree, because I want to evolve my own thinking in real time, and I can't if I'm just silent. I have to push you, and then you push me back, and like we see where we settle out. So I think that I have a deep desire to be true to myself. I love the word authentic. I don't have the same reaction that you do.
Yeah.
I think there is an authentic self that is a real thing, but I also completely buy into alter ego.
Yeah. So like when I'm talking about that, it's like, it's again, understanding that we've got many identities that we have. So, if I'm perceived by other people as being a challenger personality, which is very easy. I mean, of course, I'm working with, ambitious people or achievers, and, they're coming to me to get a specific skill set or a paradigm shift or something. And I need to, sometimes you got to take the battering ram approach, and you got to crack through it, and you got to be tough with them.
Oh, plus, God, I fucking love to watch that.
Plus, I've got really big personalities coming my way. Like, I'm working with the people that you're seeing on ESPN or Sky Sports on the highlight reels. Like, those are big personalities. And they have nothing but yes people around them. Well, I'm not a yes person. And so, especially, I'm sometimes working with people who are just physically far larger than me as well. But
isn't that weird how that's a thing?
Yeah. It's 100% a thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's 100%, But when I go home to my 3 little kids, I got 3 beautiful little children, 6.5, 5.5 right now, or 5 and 2.5, Molly, Sophie, and Charlie. Do they want the challenger walking through the door? That is me. That's the me that's in my work environment. But I never wear my glasses around my kids. And when I walk through the door, I have this little bracelet.
To ask you about those.
I've got this little bracelet hanging on a hook at the front door. And when we were talking earlier so much about meaning and how we as human beings, we get to add narrative and story to anything. We can add meaning to anything. That's why when we meet someone who they've lost a coffee mug and they're just distraught, it's because it meant something to them. Maybe someone gave it to them and it was in a moment where it was emotionally charged, and it's whatever it is. But before I walk through that door, I make a very conscious intention that there is a different Todd, different self that's walking through that door. And when I open up the door, I've got a hook with this bracelet hanging on it, which Molly made for me, and it's got their 3 initials, Molly, Sophie, and Charlie. It's got Only Love, and it's got my wife's name on it. The original one, which got lost, just had my kids' initials. But when I put that on, I am now inspired by the identity of Mr. Rogers. He's the person that I most want to embody for my kids.
That's interesting.
Because if there is someone that embodies the characteristics and traits that I want my children to experience with me, which is playfulness, fun, patience.
And a lot of clothes changing.
Wonderful sweaters.
Yes.
That's who I most want to activate the traits of, right? And so here's what I know is that's not me being fake. That's not me pretending anything, because what I know after 22 years of experience doing this, all of those qualities and traits already exist inside of me. Patience lives inside of me. It's just not flexed every single day when I'm in my entrepreneurial role. Playfulness or fun or goofiness doesn't necessarily have a place in my business the way that it is. Other businesses, yeah, playfulness could be a big part of it. But when I go through the door, I want to be that playful, fun self. And so when I put that on, there is a state change. And that's me being very intentional. I'm creating a ritual so that I can be an absolute superstar. I want to be excellent in that area. I don't want to be average.
Wearing it now?
Because when I go away, Molly always hands it to me so that they're with me when I'm away. Yeah, but normally I wouldn't have it on, kind of. But yeah, so because I'm in LA, I'm not in New York City.
Right.
I'm wearing it right now. I also knew that I'd be talking about it. So my point about that, because we're talking about the authentic self. What I want to extrapolate out for people is you've got many selves that you can be authentic with, because the current kind of definition of authenticity or authentic is that there's one you, and there isn't one you, right? And so that you were talking about being the most true to yourself as you can. And I agree with that. The most true to the self that I can be is that I want to be as amazing for my kids and give them the same amount of energy that I've just given 9 hours in my day at work. Because how many people that are watching this right now spend and give a whole bunch of other people in their day that they don't really even care about a bunch of energy, and then they go home energy depleted and just sort of slough through the rest of the evening, despite the fact that the people that they love and care about the most, that they would be most distraught over if they lost them, they're not showing up for. Energy isn't this, tank that gets depleted in your day. If you want to believe that, then 100% it is. That's the paradigm that you're living through. That's your gravitational pull. Then 100% it is. Mine, it's not. I've got just an absolute abundance of energy that I get to walk through in the threshold of our apartment back in New York City, that when I do, I look forward to it. I can't wait to walk through that and put on that so I can be phenomenal for my kids now and phenomenal for my wife. Wow. That's my existence. And it can be for anybody else.
And if you imagine Mr. Rogers for your kids, who do you imagine for your wife?
Well, that's between
very fair.
Yeah,
very fair.
But I'll give you another example here, because
now I'm so fucking curious. No, I get it.
So I've done a lot of media around the book. Fortunate
132 podcasts now with this one?
114. This is 114.
Jesus.
Done like NBC and CBS, PBS did a spot on it, and back in the motherland of Canada, everyone jumped on board to support the Canadian hero, the Canadian Sun kind of thing, which was great. But on a lot of those interviews, I kind of have a uniform. It's like a blazer and a pocket square and all that and glasses. And my wife, she was always giving me a rough time. She's like, the person that I fell in love with is this super funny, you're a big jokester, you love giving people a hard time, you're always laughing, but that doesn't necessarily come out as much with you when you're doing your interviews. So I was on the Today Show just last month with, it was going to be with Hoda Kotb and Jenna Bush. But Hoda took some leave, and so then it was Holly Robinson Pete and Jennifer Nettles, the lead singer for Sugarland. And it's kind of it's that daytime talk type of thing, and they liked a more playful thing. So when I was going on there, I was like, you know what? Who would I most want to show up as so I can have that more playful, fun personality that's there? Because it's there, I've got it. And it was Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. I love them in their interviews. They're funny, they're jokey. And so that's what I showed up as. This time I didn't wear the uniform of a blazer. I actually wore something very similar to this. And yeah, you look at that interview versus the other ones, just a different part of me was showing up in it. And, as soon as it got done, it went amazing. And immediately the producer's like, we got to get you back. We want to talk about like more and stuff. So that's my point about like this whole, there's a lot of people who are getting trapped by this idea of authenticity, authentic self. And I think people need to be really careful, be a lot more choosy about what they allow these definitions to be. Because I love the idea. I don't think that people are intentionally trying to deceive people around these words by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
But I think that they're being co-opted by a really bad, a bad idea that is trapping many people. Because the reality is, when you're just starting out, like you have this taste and this flavor of something that's better than what you are right now. Mm-hmm. And so there's this internal resistance and this struggle around that. And then people don't take the action. And so my advice to that is like, fuck that. I'm not so concerned about you being authentic, because you thinking about calling your mom and telling her that you love her, but then not doing it, that makes you feel good. Picking up the phone and calling your mom, and for some people saying the tough words of "I love you," if you're not in a family that says that very often, it creates two totally different possibilities, right? Like that's whatever it takes for you to pick up the phone and say those words. I like that person. Whatever it takes for someone to actually launch the video or, launch the business, whatever it took for you on the inside, whether you were being fake and pretending to be someone else or not, I don't care, because you toppled the domino. Everyone's so concerned about the perceptions of other people. I just don't care. And I'm coming at it from the experience of people who've done it. Like, you know what the greatest soccer player who'll be in the rankings of one of the top 3 soccer players of all time thinks when he's on the soccer field? This is not in press conferences.
What player are we talking about?
I can't say because I don't let people know who my clients are. But he fundamentally believes that no one deserves to be on the pitch with him. He's personally offended that people are sharing the blades of grass with him. And so he feels like it's his personal responsibility to destroy you and embarrass and humiliate you out there because of you don't put in the amount of work that I do. You do not put in the amount of work that I do to become this great. And it offends me that you're even on my team sometimes. And so now I've got to show you up and show you just how much it's going to take for you to even sniff my cleats.
Wow.
Now, some people think, well, that's an egotistical jerk. It's egotistical jerk if he was saying that in a press conference. That's why he's not saying it. But think about that from a healthy internal superego standpoint. If that helps you be the greatest player or competitor in your genre, then what does it matter?
It's actually super interesting. And I don't know where I come down on that. So my thing is, here's my thing. I'm a servant to greatness. Mm-hmm. That's what I've chosen to value. So if they're going to leverage the darkness that hard to get good, I will say, hey, it might work. Be a little bit careful. Watch Michael Jordan's Hall of Fame speech, and you'll see the toll that only relying on anger in the darkness, it does extract a toll.
Yeah.
But it is an extraordinary tool for some people to leverage. And I think the light and the dark both have massive utility.
Yeah.
I just think people have to be really careful about if you're always in that dark energy.
Sure.
Then now, if he were having to choose between it's to be the greatest, I must be in the dark energy all the time, then I would have no beef with it. I just think it's probably a false dichotomy. He probably doesn't have to only rely on the dark and the hate and the you're not good enough. And so I worry, like as a social animal, that he'd probably have more fun if he found a way to elevate and inspire those around him and still outwork them. Like here's the truth. And oh God, I'm about to turn some people off. I'm going to miss you when you unsubscribe. Here's the truth of me. I outwork everyone on this team. And I know the people right now are listening to this. So my team is hearing me say it right now.
Yeah.
But this is not a bad thing. It's not a dark energy thing. It's like, I want my team to know they can count on me to outwork them. They can count on me to carry a load that's heavier than anyone else. That I want that I want to be out front. I want the first slings and arrows to hit me. I want them to be able to file in behind me. Now, at the same time, I fucking love it when somebody wants to make me sweat. They're like, no, I'm going to play at your level. I'm going to step out. Then it's like, I'm going to bury you. With love. Love in my heart. But I'm fucking coming for you. Will Vu. Your name is on my lips right now. I could hear the team laugh. So that motherfucker is gunning for my position. In no uncertain terms, he said his goal in 5 years is to be co-CEO, which secretly means in 5 years he wants to be CEO. And he's just trying to be kind. So I'm going to bury Will. But I'm going to do it in a way that uplifts him and lets him know that I fucking want to sweat. And God, if he can overtake me, I will be very impressed. So it's like you can get the same result without sliding so permanently into the darkness.
So when I'm describing what's going on in his head, I'm obviously saying it in a very intense way, but there is an attitude of playfulness behind what he's also saying as well. So he's playing with dark and light. And I mean, as someone who's now, worked with him for a very long time, I've seen this huge evolution in his change. But what I just like about what you just did though was, what you just did, that's what I would call as being authentic. Because I think what's really important for people that watch, whether it's consuming little tidbits of, snackables on social media, is that they get the real and true story of what it's like. And what it like, that's your mindset, that I'm going to bury you with love. Right? Like, And that's, for me, it's like, no, coming into our orbit as clients, like, I'll win because we have this thing, we outcare. We outcare everybody else. You can't outcare me because I care more. And mine comes from a very challenging place from a kid. I have this, the reason I can get challenged, or not get challenged, but the reason I can get frustrated with some of the, platitudes that are out there that are just not true, is because I care a lot that people get the truth, like the real truth. Like our company is based on, scientific research, right? That's why in the book, everyone gets the concept immediately. But what I want to get people to understand is, no, there's a lot of science behind why all these things work in the methodology that we put into using, and shaping other people's identities and stuff. But I have an extraordinary level of compassion. And that comes from, I grew up on a farm and ranch, amazing parents, 2 older brothers that are great. And my younger sister went off to a church camp when I was 12 years old. Because I was an extrovert. I just needed to be around people as much as I can. So if there was a Catholic camp this weekend, I was a Catholic. If there was a Protestant one the next weekend, I was a Protestant. If there was a Baptist one, I was a Baptist. Didn't matter. I just wanted to be around people. And went away to a camp, and over the course, 2 men singled me out, and over the course of a couple of days, sexually abused and raped me in a pretty bad way. Right? When you're 12 years old, that's not an easy thing to deal with. Oof. Immediately when I got home. From that, you're dealing with so much shame, so much humiliation, so much, guilt, embarrassment. Didn't want anyone to find out about it. Plus, on top of all of the, story and kind of, stuff that they put inside my head, dropped off my duffel bag at the front door, and we had just put in a pool in our backyard. Went to the garage, changed into my swimming trunks, and proceeded to try to drown myself in the pool. So struggled with, it didn't obviously happen, but struggled with like suicide throughout my teens and my 20s because I was trying to get away from that. And that's why I know I am world-class at mental game coaching because, I know that some of the things that drive people to do the things that they do come from dark places, but there is another side to that like that gift that I got from that experience was that I've got extraordinary level of compassion for the challenges that some people have gone through, which can be tough. But what I want people to know is that doesn't need to be your story forever. That doesn't need to define you by any stretch of the imagination.
How did you build back from that?
I don't know. Like, I went internal with a lot of stuff. Definitely changed my personality kind of in a flash. I was always I was always a kind of a serious kid in that I just loved ruminating on ideas as a youngster, but I was far more kind of like playful, definitely. Turned me probably into a little bit more of a achiever because I wanted to get away from my province, really. It just kind of everywhere I went, I just saw reminders of things for me. That's probably explains why I've done so much travel and lived in so many places. Not the only thing that explains it, but consumed as much information as I could, which was tough because I'm a huge dyslexic. And so reading was always a challenge for me until I got diagnosed at 21. I went through school without getting diagnosed with dyslexia. Oh. I just thought I was, I kept it. I was very good at hiding it, but I never thought of myself as stupid or something like that. But I always felt like, there's something about books that I'm drawn towards, but man, do these things ever challenge me? It's like the hero's journey process of like entering the cave. I kept on going back to the cave to try to enter it and read. But, I got into reading about the mind so that I could try and master it because it was a dark place for me all the time to go to, battled with, I still do sometimes battle with night terrors. Not anywhere near as much anymore, but night terrors was something I battled for a really, really, really long time. So sleeping was tough. I kind of dreaded the idea of going to sleep. And you know what? Sleep is like the number one thing. The first thing I work with people on for performance, whether it's an executive, an entrepreneur, leader, anyone, is like anyone that's here, getting your sleep in, you're protecting that time is so important. And here I was, maybe sleeping 4 hours a night.
Jesus. It sounds like this may not be a need anymore, but have you looked at the studies on MDMA and PTSD?
I was in the largest MDMA study.
Oh, shit.
The one at Bellevue Hospital in New York City.
Did it help?
Yes. So, it's, and Tucker. Tucker's a really close friend as well. And MDMA, what MDMA did for me was it created an anchor place where I could see that amazing level of self-love, which is something that you struggle with when, you attach yourself to these stories that, because self-worth becomes a real big issue for people who've gone through things like this, especially when, the abusers are telling you that you're not worth it and that, how can your family love you when they're not here to, no one's here, so how much can anyone really love you, and they're just beating down. And they did a very good systematic process of it over the course of those days. But when I had MDMA for the first time, that anchor place that it gave me, because it was like floating in a place of just pure. It was like dropping into like an ocean of like just pure self-love or bliss. Like it's really hard to describe to people. I was like, when I came out of it, I was like, okay, like I know that's a place that I can get to, which then really started the kind of journey towards really kind of facing it finally. Cause I never told anyone about this until just 2 years ago, where I finally kind of was frayed at the edges because of a bunch of other circumstances that were happening around me, a business lawsuit and stuff where I was suing someone, and we had a tough childbirth with our little guy Charlie, and my wife had a really tough go, and so I was sort of holding as much things up as I possibly could. It's the idea of like trying to keep all these different beach balls below the surface of the water. There's only so much you can do, right. And finally this thing came to the surface because I hadn't necessarily dealt with it. And, but steamrolled towards it and worked through it. But that study, I'm not going to say that it's because it's not a magic bullet for everybody.
But you'd say that it did help start the
100%. And just because right now the statistics on that, I was in the third trial phase, which was the final trial phase of it. And the third trial phase, they kind of reserved for like the worst case scenario people, people who've been living with trauma and PTSD for, an exorbitant amount of time. But I think the latest stat, don't quote me exactly on it, but I think it's an 86% cure rate on the recurrence of PTSD. Wow. Which, if you know anything about other possible treatments for PTSD and trauma, is an insane number. So I can't wait for it to be, legalized for people, because it's going to be really hard for Congress to say no to a group of people that are former veterans of the United States, military, and say no to because it's been phenomenal. So the work that the MAPS Institute has done at championing this, and other people behind the scenes underground for a long time, giving people semblances of hope that, there is a pathway to the other side, has been amazing. So, that's all me kind of coming back around to that incident, in some ways it really shaped kind of the direction that I took with getting into the mental game stuff. I needed it for myself.
I was going to say, man, I can imagine, talk about pieces clicking into place. So having gone through abuse like that and needing a version of yourself that's the best of everything that maybe is somehow outside of that and hasn't been touched by that.
Yeah,
and
100%.
Fuck, man.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But in the end, now that I know so much more about it, what I was tapping into to kind of avoid in some ways it was avoiding, but getting away from that identity that was wounded was tapping into that playful side, that, when I went on the football field or whatever, which was a safe haven in some ways, and sport was big time for me, allowed me to truly connect to this amazing superpower that we have. That's why I'm so passionate about getting people introduced to this phenomenon that everyone that's watching has already used. You've used it, because we use it when we're in our formative years between the age of 1 and 7, when we're always, you're pretending to be Batman jumping off the sofa, or you're pretending to be your favorite, athlete on the front driveway to see. And it's all answering the question, what could I do if? What could I do if I, was LeBron James in this moment? Or what could I do if I was Wayne Gretzky? Or what could I do if I was Batman or Superman? And you play with that idea. And when you take a look at that section of of a child's or of a person's life, that's where almost all of our development happens, 1 to 7. And then when you look at it from a brain wave perspective, children that are operating between the ages of 1 and 7, or living in the ages of 1 to 7, are operating in the theta brainwave state consistently. They haven't developed into the beta, which is when frontal lobe starts to kick in, right? The development of the brain, and now our higher reasoning and thinking and judgment skills starts to kick in. And so that should be telling people that there's something about that that era of our lives that we can reconnect to. And how we can reconnect to it is our creative imagination. Creative imagination operates inside the theta brainwave state, where we can suspend so many things and see ourselves in a different way. And an alter ego was that kind of magical key to help unlock all of these possibilities that exist inside of clients and other people now.
It's fucking interesting, dude. Interesting concept. The book is out now. Where can people get it?
Everywhere. Airport bookstores, Amazon.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
That's very
exciting. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, find it, it's all around the globe, and we're getting it, sold the rights into a whole bunch of different languages already with it. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. And, if people want to connect with me, toddherman.me is my home base on the interwebs, and, all my activity on Instagram or social as well to, where I share some behind the scenes of things that we're doing. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Todd, thank you for joining us on the show. This was amazing. We may have set a record here. So thank you. Thank you for the time, man. It was awesome.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
All right. Peace out, everybody. Till next time, be legendary. Later.
We only get one emotion at a time. That's how our brain works. One emotion. So our job is to really find the right state that we want to be in, the right emotional place, and use that rather than let the brain win. And if that is untrained and unconditioned, it will win.